Coming up next on Historic Places, who are the first people of the Kumeyaay Nation in Southern California and Baja California, Mexico, and why do they live in two countries? Also, their traditional territory during pre-contact is vast, beautiful, and abundant. We'll show you how resourceful and complex the Kumeyaay people are. Few know about the Kumeyaay village of Kosai near Old Town San Diego. We'll tell you why the village has incredible historical significance. And the San Diego Royal Presidio is a National Historic Landmark. It is where the first California mission is founded. We'll explain why it's moved 5 years later. These stories and so much more are coming up next. Hello and welcome to Historic Places, where we help document and preserve San Diego's history. I'm Elsa Sevilla. Thank you for joining us. The first people of the Kumeyaay Nation live in Southern California and Northern Baja California for 12,000 years and beyond, but yet few know their rich and diverse history. That's why telling the Kumeyaay people's story is so important. But their civilization will be nearly wiped out by foreigners, diseases, and a new religion. Let's take a look.
Most of our songs all start with the sun going down. And they start like that because it's talking about it's within our creation story.
The creation story tells how the first people of the Kumeyaay Nation live in the region for thousands of years. This beautiful, majestic, and serene region is the first people of the Kumeyaay Nation's traditional territory during pre-contact and to the present.
Our people, the Kumeyaay people, the Ipai and the Tipai, people are people of the ocean, the valleys, the mountains, the desert, and the Colorado River. All these different topographical areas are our traditional territory.
At one time, we lived in clans. A lot of times, there was a lot of different clans, and they never really kept the village. Each village was probably between the biggest, maybe about 1,500, and then it would, if it got over too big like that, then they would create another village.
North of San Diego River, generally using that term as the Ipai, which the same diet, the same language, some sub-languages are a little bit different. The cultures are basically the same. South is the Tipai. And then when you get up in the San Pasqual, and then you would consider all of us Kumeyaay.
Dozens of shamuls or communities coexist in the vast territory. It starts from the coast, then north to Oceanside, and south to Ensenada, Baja California, Mexico, and then east to the Colorado River in what is now Southern California and Northern Baja California. The U.S.-Mexico border cuts through their territory when it is established in the early 1900s. But despite the major disruptions during the past 250 years, the First People's traditions live on.
The Kumeyaay from before contact with Europeans were organized along clan lines, shamuls, and the shamuls had a very complicated, very sophisticated type of, I guess you'd call it, governmental structure or interrelationship between the clans.
There were never like cities or towns, but there was just different villages of clans, and each clan had a leader. And then there was a bigger leader that would bring all the different clans together. There was a leader for different villages if they were the same clan, and then there was a leader that led all that whole villages of that clan. Then they would meet together.
I think where I look at the complexity of the Kumeyaay is with the origin stories and the songs and some of the games that have carried through, and the idea that they knew who their people were. They were very careful not to interbreed. I think they knew the consequences of that.
Few know how resourceful, adaptive, and sophisticated the First People are, as they are trained astronomers, scientists, doctors, spiritual leaders, horticulturists, tool makers, and business people. They are resourceful as they trade countless items with the different shamuls. They are experts at harvesting and hunting.
Women were more advanced than doctors that are today, because we were taught in our initiation ceremonies how to have a child, how to give birth, how to take care of yourself, all through pregnancy and through childbirth. And to be able to do that on your own, just with other women, think of how much scientific knowledge you would have to know and how much medicine knowledge you would have to know.
There was a lot of bartering and trading going on. Maybe I was a good person that had a good garden, and you were a good basket maker. Hey, I'll trade you this. And so within that village, that's how things were done.
They live in a complex society, and they are specialists in many fields, as they rely on astrology and astronomy for their survival. And they use ethnobotany, the science of plants, to make medicinal remedies to prevent and cure illnesses and diseases.
We have one of the most biodiverse areas on Earth, and in North America, the United States, it's one of the most biodiverse places that is known. And so all those are medicines and foods and things that we utilized on a daily basis.
There were areas that were occupied year-round, out in the desert, along the coast, and then there were other areas that were occupied seasonally. And these were territories that belonged to the clans, don't belong to an individual clan, or sometimes there were multiple clans that shared the resources in an area.
What we also found out that they were consuming with full utilization. So for instance, if they were hunting a deer, of course they will eat the meat, but then they will break the bones for bone marrow, and then they will crush the end of the bones, which are more spongy and they contain fats, and they probably were boiling them and skimming the fat out of those bones, and then they were using the bones for tools.
To secure their food sources, the First People move from place to place and allow the natural habitat to replenish itself, never taking more than they need, and always respecting Mother Earth. Every living thing in nature has a spirit, and it's respected. That is the First People's ways.
There's a whole wide variety, and the plants that you see, every part is used for something different. So the roots, the stalks, the blossoms, the fruits, all, and the leaves, the stalks, everything can be utilized at different times and for different reasons.
They were going from one habitat to another, taking a little bit, moving to another habitat, letting the other habitat replenish, and then they come back and they take a little bit and they move on and they move on. And this is why we're seeing this amazing diversity of species, from fish and crabs and toad and frogs and birds and small mammals. And as I said, when I say small mammals, huge diversity of, we have three species of rabbits here, and squirrels and wood rats and mice and snakes and other reptiles and lizards. So everything that was moving, they were eating.
After living in harmony for more than 12,000 years, change is coming to their territory in a most drastic and violent way. Despite it all, the First People will live, survive, and overcome the largest cultural clash in the Western Hemisphere. But their civilization will be nearly wiped out at the hands of a new religion, foreigners, diseases, torture, and forced labor. This site near Old Town and the 5 Freeway is incredibly important. Few know this is the First People's village of Kosai, where a community lived by the San Diego River and the Pacific Ocean. Kosai is also the village where the First People encounter the 4 Spanish expeditions as they arrive in San Diego in 1769, 250 years ago. In a span of 51 years, the Spanish eventually and gradually take Alta California, building 21 missions. It is a multi-level campaign by the Spanish to gain territory, a labor force, and riches for Spain, with a disregard for other civilizations.
If we take a look at the treatment of indigenous people throughout the Americas, it's a blueprint. What they did here, they did in Chile, they did in Argentina, they did in Costa Rica, Mexico, all the different places.
In today's world, the Spanish are not necessarily seen in a positive way. After all, they're invaders. They came here, they got the local people's permission to set up little buildings and homes and communities, and then they abused that. From the eyes of the native people, they were abusing the system.
The Spanish crown and the Catholic Church used deception, intimidation, violence, and cultural psychosis to gain a foothold in the Americas. It comes at a devastating loss to the indigenous people throughout the world and to the first people of the Kumeyaay Nation in the region.
1768, King Carlos III sent word to New Spain, which is what we now know as Mexico, go claim Alta California, or what we now know as the state of California. Go claim it for Spain. And it was a political move, but he wanted it to look religious.
In Alta California, it takes 4 expeditions to take the Kumeyaay Nation's traditional territory, 2 overland groups and 2 by ship. Using 250-year-old data, illustrations are created to show what may have happened during this time. Like in many cases, most of the Spanish expeditions should have failed, as many on the ships die from scurvy. Those on foot face a treacherous 700-mile journey in extreme heat with little food or water.
So the natives actually saved the Spaniards in the first couple of days and set up camp on what we know now as Presidio Hill. So the first few days were just spent getting organized.
And the idea was to make settlements in what would become the most important seaports. So obviously San Diego was the first destination. From there, they believed that Monterey was going to be a great seaport.
The Spanish are looking for ports to settle along the California coast, but from the beginning, the First People's warriors organize and resist the Spanish. While little is written about the native warriors, we know they organize and use intimidation and other tactics to scare the Spanish expeditions. But the warriors are no match against the Spanish soldiers, weapons, and horses.
That somebody was coming. They said that they were going to ride this thing. They didn't know what it was, but he was going to be shiny. And what they were talking about, like a conquistador coming.
After camping at the village of Cossay for days, the Spanish later move up to Presidio Hill to get a better vantage point to watch for ships passing through or arriving. This is where the first Spanish mission and garrison are founded in 1769. We're right in the middle of the Presidio. Such a historic site that few people know about, and all that history. Where are we now?
So on the top of this hill was where the commandant's house was, the commandant being sometimes the governor of California and sometimes the captain in charge of the Presidio. This is the highest point on the hill, and the commandant would have commandeered this for his own house, and so he could have a view out towards the bay and where the ships would be coming in from San Blas. And so he would have a complete panorama. He could see how his men were in the barracks behind us. He could see the chapel below us. So this would be the promontory where his house would be.
Nearly nothing survives at the Presidio, as the site and buildings fall into disrepair after the 1800s. But the Presidio's footprint, along with many artifacts, survive because the Presidio site is covered with dirt to protect it, and the Junipero Serra Museum is built in 1929. Today, some call it San Diego's Lost City, or the Machu Picchu of San Diego, because of the many discoveries found through the decades.
There were several families over there. The occupation here varied from as low as 18 soldiers and their families to over 300 people. Oh. Not always stationed here. They would come here from Baja California or by ship. Okay. they would kind of recoup from the travels and then move on back up to Monterrey or to San Juan Capistrano.
But in the early years, it was only the mission and it was only men, right? And the women came later, is that
women
correct?
came after about 1775, right?
Right.
So prior to that, there were a couple of women here. The blacksmith's mother was here. Felipe Romero's mother was here because she came up with him from I believe, Sinaloa.
It doesn't take long before the Spanish began to take more territory to build their missions. This pushes the First People further to the east to seek refuge from the foreigners. But those captured by the Spanish are forced to build the missions and other structures throughout Alta California. The warriors continue to resist as they organize and attack and burn numerous missions on both sides of the border.
The people that attacked that mission were from the community of Matberjau, or the land of the foxes, San Jose de la Zora. So there's people in that community, on that reservation, who have still made that springtime migratory cycle to the ocean, to the beach, La Misión.
The historical logs and the various excavations hold so much information from the past. While so much from this period has been forgotten, there is still so much to learn.
Each mission had to have a record of everything in the missions. And they have records of the disease that each Indian had when he became sick, how old he was.
They would put these columns, if you will. So you'd have to imagine we're opening up the doors and we're walking into Alta California's first mission, first church.
And what would have been here?
This would have been the nave, and on the left and right would have been walls roughly 12 to 15 feet tall. We're not sure because as they collapsed, we don't have the tops of them. But if in fact we dug through these mounds right now, we would get down to plastic that we covered it up with in 1976, peel the plastic back, and you would have adobe bricks. And you would in some cases still see painting on them because we simply covered everything back up.
Because the mission and the Presidio are in a constant state of flux, new buildings are erected through the years. Today, there is nothing visible from California's first mission structure except its footprint. The mission is moved to Mission Valley just 5 years later because the priests need a better source of water to grow the crops, and they want to keep the soldiers away from the women and girls due to countless rapes.
Parade ground, church, stables would have been outside, and then to our left, over here going towards Taylor Street, would have been the jail, the entrance, and where the armaments were kept. And then all along the north face would have been the barracks, the blacksmith shop, and where you would do your non-military things, the housing.
Detailed accounts from the priests and soldiers' logs give us an idea of what happened when the Spanish arrived in the region, and a new virtual reality video also shows details about the site after the 1770s. The 3D video tells where the mission and later the Presidio buildings are erected. We get a glimpse of the video, but you can catch more of the 3D at the Junipero Serra Museum.
These are equirectangular 3D images. So if you see how distorted this image is, in a virtual reality environment, that image becomes fully immersive so that you're looking in everywhere you see, so you feel like you're standing inside the Presidio.
For decades, historians believe the Presidio is a quadrangle shape, but it's not. Recently discovered information shows a different shape no one anticipated. Victor Ciccarelli from Steammaker is hired by the San Diego History Center to create the video. An unexpected discovery appears when Victor does a thorough examination of hundreds of pieces of historical data in 2018. Victor compares the data and recreates the Presidio.
And now we can start rebuilding buildings and rebuilding the landscape, putting together the chapels from everything that we know. And we can rebuild what we know the Presidio actually looked like in 1790. And you're now seeing what very few people have had the opportunity to see. This is San Diego's Presidio.
Do we know that it was a square? Because some people don't think that it was a complete square.
Yeah, it was fairly complete. What they don't know for sure is how many corners they had garrisons. Like this one up here whether there couldn't be one here. The topography is very difficult to work with.
The video allows us to see where the commandant's dwellings, the soldiers' barracks, the chapel, along with the priests' sleeping quarters and other buildings are located. Today, there is a large cross made of bricks at the commandant's quarters and a road that passes through the most important historic site in San Diego and California. We can only imagine what other historic artifacts lay beneath the road and parking lot.
They started excavating and finding just amazing things, and it was called San Diego's Lost City because this was the first city up here on the hill, and this was the first mission before they moved it to Mission Valley.
We can learn so much more about the Presidio through the various archaeological digs and 250-year-old historical data. Pictures from the different excavations from the 1960s through the 1990s show countless discoveries from San Diego's Lost City. It also shows how the Presidio citizens live. Richard Carrico was part of those excavations and knows so much of the history.
As part of my graduate program, I started digging here in 1974-75 at the chapel specifically, and then the next year actually took over as director of the excavations here. And this was through San Diego State, at that time college, with Paul Wiesel. And we would dig here 5 or 6 days a week, even though the class was only on Saturdays, and basically pulled this city back out of the dirt.
The priests and soldiers commit gruesome acts against the First People. So many of those details are in the historical logs. There's malnutrition, forced labor, beatings, culture psychosis, sexual assaults, and death. While some describe the mission system as a great accomplishment, many others feel it was a violent and deadly period. The effects are still felt by so many today.
The people who were subjugated there, who were kept in servitude, they were basically held as slaves. They were held as captives. And the Spanish soldiers were doing whatever they wanted with the women. People were committing suicide. People were dying of diseases. And they needed to have those people there to do the work.
They would beat the Indians if they caught any of them loafing or not paying attention to what they were being told.
So someone of their own kind, a native, would keep them sort of in line, would you say?
Force them into line.
As the First People continue to resist the Spanish, some are taken and forced into the missions. But we learn the majority of the First People remain free from mission rule, meaning they live in their traditional territory outside of the missions. Despite direct contact with the missions, the Kumeyaay Nation maintained their independence during 51 years of Spanish rule.
We maintained control over most of our territory throughout that time, throughout till the Spanish were gone, and even through the point of secularization.
If you go to the church and you ask them for food and you agree to work for them, and then they lock you up at night and you can't go anywhere, in the morning they open the doors and expect you to go out into the fields and work and do the things that the church wanted, and then at night they lock you up again. This is not going to be popular.
In one letter that I discovered, I sent to the governor, "I've sent you some Indians that try to run away from me. They're habitual, and I think a whipping, 2 or 3 whippings to last a month will take care of this, will act as an example of what will happen to the other Indians."
To compare the numbers before and post-contact, there are about 30,000 First People living in their traditional territory, but only about 3,000 survived the Spanish period. Despite the cruel ways of mission life, the First People survive, and they are now telling their rich history.
Because for me it's very important to keep our traditions and language alive. And I always like to share. It's important to let people know that, we're Kumeyaay, we're Paipai, we're Kiliwa, we're Paipai, all the native groups, all the human groups, we're still here.
While only a brief period, Spanish influence makes a significant impact on the region and its people. The cultures may have blended, but there are also many reminders of the First People's civilization and how they overcome the largest cultural clash in the Western Hemisphere. That's why sharing their story and history is so important 250 years since the Spanish arrived. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Historic Places, the first people of the Kumeyaay Nation. A special thank you to all our experts who have contributed to the series through the years. Remember, you can catch us at any time from anywhere on kpbs.org or at sevillaproductions.com. Thanks for watching. Until next time.
Support for this program comes from the KPBS Explore Local Content Fund, supporting new ideas and programs for San Diego.